Imagine stepping into your favorite restaurant on your birthday, expecting warm smiles and familiar faces, only to be met with cold indifference. This is the reality for Mrs. Nora, an elegant elderly woman who has been a loyal customer of this very restaurant for years. Each visit holds cherished memories of celebrations with loved ones, making it more than just a place to dine. It's a sanctuary of joy and comfort. But today, things take an unexpected turn. A young waiter, Tom, barely gives her a second glance, dismissing her as though she doesn't belong. What Tom doesn't know is that Mrs. Nora is no ordinary customer. She is the mother of the restaurant's owner. With each passing moment, tension rises, and Mrs. Nora is left wondering if she should let this disrespect slide, or take a stand in a way that will leave Tom stunned. Will Mrs. Nora accept the cold treatment on her special day, or will she reveal a truth that no one in the restaurant sees coming? Watch as dignity and justice unfold in a surprising turn of events that you won't forget. If you're ready for an unforgettable story, make sure to like this video, comment and subscribe to our channel to catch more inspiring tales like this one. Don't miss out on what happens next. As Mrs. Nora approached the counter, she offered Tom, the young waiter, a warm smile. She introduced herself and mentioned her reservation, expecting him to check the list and guide her to her table. However, Tom didn't return the smile. Instead, he barely glanced at her before giving a dismissive shrug. "There are no available tables," he replied flatly, his tone impersonal and cold. Mrs. Nora blinked, momentarily thrown off by his abrupt response. She was certain her reservation had been confirmed, as she'd called the day before to ensure everything would be ready for her birthday meal. Politely, she clarified, "Oh, I had a reservation under the name Nora. I called just yesterday to make sure there would be a table." Tom sighed, his expression showing irritation as if she were wasting his time. "I said there are no available tables," he repeated, raising his brow impatiently. "It's a busy night. You should try somewhere else." His words hit her with a cold finality, and she felt an ache of hurt and confusion. Mrs. Nora was surprised, even dismayed. She had always been treated with warmth and respect in this restaurant. The staff knew her by name, often stopping to chat or help her with special arrangements. This cold, almost hostile treatment from Tom felt not only unexpected but also deeply wounding. Struggling to keep her composure, she took a steadying breath and offered a compromise. "I don't mind waiting by the counter if that's all right," she said, hoping to soften the interaction and perhaps give Tom a chance to correct his attitude. But Tom's gaze remained hard, and he crossed his arms with a smirk. "I've already told you, there's nothing available." "It's not up for discussion," he replied curtly, making it clear he wasn't interested in finding a solution. There was a finality in his tone that left no room for further negotiation, and his posture only added to the air of dismissal. A knot of hurt and disappointment tightened in Mrs. Nora's chest. She felt the weight of the other diners' glances, as if they, too, had noticed the young waiter's disrespectful attitude. She had never imagined she would feel so unwelcome in a place so close to her heart. Attempting to keep her composure, she gave him a small nod, stepping back slightly as she processed the situation. But inside, Mrs. Nora's emotions churned. The shock and sadness were undeniable, and the warm excitement she had felt earlier now felt distant, replaced by a sense of frustration and helplessness. Little did Tom know, he wasn't speaking to an ordinary customer, but to someone whose bond with the restaurant went deeper than he could possibly understand. Standing there in the midst of the restaurant's familiar hum, Mrs. Nora felt a flood of memories surface, memories she had thought were safely tucked away. Tom's cold, dismissive treatment had opened a door to past experiences she had long tried to forget. She remembered times in her life when she was looked at differently, spoken to with condescension, or even ignored entirely simply because of her appearance. Those instances, though in the past, had left an imprint on her spirit, reminding her of the silent prejudices that had followed her through the years. In those moments, she had always chosen to respond with grace, not because she didn't feel the pain but because she believed in the strength of her own dignity. Yet now, in this restaurant, a place she held close to her heart, she was facing a similar disdain from a young man who knew nothing about her. The hurt felt sharper, more personal. She had always imagined this restaurant as a sanctuary, a place free of judgment or dismissal. Today, however, that sense of safety felt suddenly fragile. Mrs. Nora took a deep breath, steadying herself. The disappointment in Tom's behavior was deep, but she had no desire to cause a scene. Her life had been filled with moments where she had chosen restraint over confrontation, peace over discord. She had learned early on that standing up for herself didn't always mean raising her voice. Still, the sting of being treated with such disregard on a day meant for joy and celebration was difficult to ignore. An inner conflict brewed within her. Part of her wanted to let it go, to move on with her evening and keep the peace. But another part, one that had been tested and tempered by years of quiet resilience, whispered that she shouldn't have to endure this. Her dignity, her worth, and her rightful place in this restaurant were things she had earned, and she didn't want to let this young waiter's bias take that away from her. With another calming breath, Mrs. Nora lifted her chin slightly, grounding herself in her own strength. She wouldn't allow her spirit to be diminished by ignorance. No matter how young or impolite Tom might be, he couldn't erase her sense of self-worth. She had endured too much in life to let a single encounter define her. Determined not to let this injustice pass, Mrs. Nora steadied herself and looked firmly at Tom. She had no intention of leaving quietly or accepting such poor treatment without speaking up. Years of quiet resilience had taught her that sometimes, standing up for one's dignity required a visible show of strength. With a calm but resolute tone, she said, "I'd like to speak to the manager, please." Her voice was steady, but it held a note of firmness that made it clear she wouldn't back down. Tom's smug expression faltered slightly. He had clearly not expected her to press further. He looked her over once more, perhaps hoping that his stony attitude would make her reconsider. But Mrs. Nora's unwavering gaze left him with no choice. With an exaggerated sigh, Tom reluctantly turned and headed toward the back to find his manager. As she waited, Mrs. Nora became aware of the growing attention around her. Nearby patrons, noticing the tension, started to pay closer attention to what was unfolding. A few people exchanged glances, murmuring quietly among themselves. Some took out their phones, discreetly beginning to record what they sensed might be an act of injustice. In today's world, these small gestures had become ways for ordinary people to bear witness, to stand against prejudice by amplifying stories that might otherwise go unseen. Their silent support gave Mrs. Nora a sense of courage, as she knew she wasn't alone. Despite the mix of emotions churning within her, she stood tall, hands clasped firmly in front of her. She reminded herself that she wasn't just standing up for herself, but for others who might face similar treatment. This wasn't merely about securing a table, it was about the principle of respect and dignity, values she believed every person was entitled to. Within a few minutes, the manager, a man named David, came out from the back. His expression was a mix of nervousness and confusion, perhaps already aware of the scrutiny the situation had drawn. He glanced briefly at the phones held by some of the patrons, understanding that this was no longer just a private exchange between customer and staff, it had the potential to become a public matter. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm David, the manager. Is there something I can help you with?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Mrs. Nora nodded, maintaining her composure. "Yes, David, there is. I've been a loyal customer here for years, and I had a reservation tonight for my birthday. However, your waiter here has refused me service, stating there are no tables available. I don't understand why my reservation would be disregarded so easily." Her words were clear, each one carefully chosen to convey both her frustration and her right to be heard. David shot a quick, disapproving glance at Tom, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. Mrs. Nora could sense the manager's embarrassment, and the attention of the patrons only added to his unease. People were watching, and the whispers had grown louder, capturing the weight of the injustice she had faced. David, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded. "I apologize for any inconvenience, Mrs." he began, unsure of her name. "Nora," she replied, "and I think this goes beyond inconvenience. I expect more from a place I've cherished for so long." The crowd's silent support and the presence of watchful eyes motivated Mrs. Nora to stand firm. She knew that this wasn't just a personal matter, it had become a stand against prejudice, with people around her bearing witness to her quiet but powerful fight for respect. As David approached, he quickly realized that this situation was far from routine. The intensity of the patrons' gazes, several with phones in hand capturing the scene, made it clear that this was now a public matter. He took a deep breath, trying to mask his unease as he prepared to address Mrs. Nora. Though he hadn't yet heard the full story, he sensed that Tom's behavior had crossed a line, and the uncomfortable attention from the crowd only confirmed it. David offered a polite smile as he introduced himself. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm David, the manager. I understand there was an issue with your reservation." Mrs. Nora nodded, her expression calm but her eyes unwavering. "Yes, David. I've been coming here for years, and tonight, on my birthday, I had a reservation. However, your waiter," she said, nodding slightly in Tom's direction, "denied me service, insisting there were no tables available. This isn't just about an error in a reservation, David. It's about respect." David swallowed, glancing at Tom, whose face was now pale with realization. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Mrs. Nora wasn't finished. "I've been in places before where people are judged or dismissed unfairly. Tonight, I was treated as if I didn't belong, and I cannot let that slide. Not for myself, and not for others who may face similar treatment," she continued, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't just a one-time incident, David. This speaks to something deeper. And I'm here to ask you to address it, not just for me, but for anyone who has ever felt unwelcome in a place where they should be treated with dignity." Her words resonated through the room, and David could feel the weight of her statement settling over him. It was no longer about appeasing an unhappy customer. It was about acknowledging a breach of respect and trust. He glanced again at the patrons, some nodding in silent agreement, others watching intently, waiting to see his response. David straightened, feeling the pressure but also a responsibility to do the right thing. "Mrs. Nora, I am truly sorry for how you were treated," he said, his tone sincere. "This behavior is unacceptable, and I can assure you, it does not reflect our values. Please allow me to personally apologize on behalf of the restaurant, and I will ensure that steps are taken to prevent this from happening again." Mrs. Nora held his gaze, her calm demeanor a testament to her strength. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his apology, but remained firm, a quiet but powerful reminder that respect and fairness should never be taken for granted. As the situation at the restaurant continued to draw attention, videos of the exchange between Mrs. Nora and David began circulating on social media. It wasn't long before they reached her son, Sam, the owner of the restaurant. Seeing his mother being mistreated in a place he had built to be welcoming and inclusive filled him with a deep sense of anger and disappointment. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and drove straight to the restaurant. When Sam arrived, he was greeted by the sight of his mother standing with quiet dignity amidst a crowd of onlookers. David stood beside her, visibly uncomfortable, while Tom, the waiter, was attempting to avoid everyone's gaze, clearly aware of the trouble he was in. Sam's expression was a mix of calm control and barely restrained anger. He walked directly over to his mother, giving her a reassuring nod before turning his attention to David and Tom. "What is going on here?" Sam's voice cut through the quiet murmur of the crowd, and his tone left no room for excuses. David looked up, flustered, and began to stammer an explanation, but Sam held up his hand to silence him. He didn't want vague answers. He wanted the truth. Turning his gaze to Tom, Sam asked, "Why has my mother been treated with such disrespect in my own restaurant?" His words were calm, but his voice carried a firmness that made everyone feel the weight of the question. Tom shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Sam's eyes. I didn't realize who she was," he mumbled, attempting to justify his behavior. I didn't know she was." His excuses only fueled Sam's anger, but he kept his voice steady. "You didn't know she was the owner's mother," Sam interrupted, "but that's not the point, is it?" He looked around at the patrons, many of whom nodded in silent agreement. "Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect. I built this place to be welcoming to everyone, not to turn people away based on assumptions or prejudice." David tried to intervene, perhaps to defend Tom or salvage the situation, but Sam wasn't interested in excuses. "My mother came here to celebrate her birthday, and instead, she was humiliated and made to feel unwelcome. This isn't a mistake that can simply be explained away. This goes against everything I stand for, everything this restaurant stands for." Turning back to Tom, Sam took a deep breath before speaking. "I cannot tolerate this kind of behavior in my restaurant. You're fired. I need people here who understand the values we stand for, who know that every customer deserves dignity and respect." Tom's face drained of color, realizing the gravity of his actions. Without another word, he gathered his things and left, his face a mix of regret and disbelief. The crowd watched in silence, and Sam felt a sense of relief knowing that the message had been clear. Discrimination, in any form, would not be tolerated here. Once Tom was gone, Sam turned back to the patrons and addressed them with sincerity. "I want to thank all of you for your support, and I apologize deeply for what you witnessed tonight. This is not what we stand for, and I will be implementing measures to ensure that it never happens again." The room erupted in applause, both in support of Sam's decision and in solidarity with Mrs. Nora. She looked at her son with pride, feeling a renewed sense of respect for his dedication to fairness and justice. This moment was more than just a stand against prejudice. It was a testament to the power of integrity and the importance of treating every individual with dignity. As the tension settled, Sam took a moment to address the patrons who had witnessed the entire incident. His voice was steady but filled with gratitude. "Thank you all for standing by my mother and for bearing witness to what happened tonight," he began. "Your presence and support mean the world to us. This restaurant was built to be a place where everyone feels valued, where no one ever has to question their worth or feel out of place." He looked around the room, meeting the supportive eyes of many customers. "I am deeply sorry that any of you had to see such disrespect displayed here. I take full responsibility and assure you that this will not be swept under the rug. To prevent any future incidents, I will be implementing new training programs for our staff, emphasizing respect, dignity, and the inclusivity that we strive for in every part of this restaurant. Discrimination has no place here." His words resonated with everyone, and an air of unity filled the space. Patrons began to clap, showing their appreciation not only for Sam's decisive action but also for his commitment to making a positive change. The applause grew louder, cheers and nods of approval echoed through the restaurant, and Sam felt the support of his community lifting him up. Turning to his mother, Sam gently placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling both pride and a renewed sense of purpose. Mrs. Nora smiled, her heart swelling with pride for her son, who had stood up for justice in such a powerful way. The entire room could feel the significance of the moment, a stand against prejudice and a powerful reminder of the strength found in unity and respect. As the applause subsided, Sam added, "Thank you for reminding me and my team of the importance of treating every person with dignity. This is our commitment to you and to every person who walks through these doors. We are grateful for your support and look forward to welcoming each of you here with the respect and care you deserve." With that, the crowd responded once more with cheers and applause, marking the end of a difficult but ultimately inspiring evening. Mrs. Nora left with her son, both feeling the power of what they had achieved together. A reminder that justice and equality can prevail when people stand together in solidarity and respect. Would you create or know something positive out of a painful experience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this story as much as we did, I handpicked this next one that will warm your heart. Please don't miss it. Click here to watch it.